Hello everybody and welcome back to another Future of the Fortress for December 2024. This is the final Future of the Fortress of the year. I've been doing this show for several years at this point, and I just have to say thank you very much to everybody who's been watching the show since release. And before I start, I would just like to quickly apologize. Normally I try to have these up around the beginning of the month, but currently I'm recording this on the 16th. Personally, I feel that this is unacceptable, but I've been extremely busy with some real life changes. I've been trying to move. So there's been a lot of paperwork and getting prepped behind the scenes. Hopefully by around February, these make it out on a more timely schedule. But enough of me talking about me, let's dive into the Future of the Fortress. If you're unfamiliar with the Future of the Fortress, it is a monthly Q&A that Tarn Adams does on the Bay 12 forums about Dwarf Fortress. Sometimes it's about things coming in the future, and sometimes it's covering more specific design concepts, and sometimes it's questions about current development. If you'd like to take part in these conversations, there's a link to the forum thread in the description of this video. You'll have to make an account on the Bay 12 forums to take part. So let's start off with the Bay 12 report for December 2024. Toady writes, November was a month. Our father passed away. The beta continues along, and we won't quite make it this year. But as you can see, when you play, we're pretty much ready to go. We're going to do some more tutorialization around character generation, travel, and having a god guide you through your first quest more carefully. And then, it should be releasable enough. November's total was 9,000 copies, which is a wholesome enough number. On to December. The first question comes in from Plump Helmet Man, and they say, are there plans to return the L button function to adventure mode on the keyboard? Much as I'm excited about all of the new features that are coming, having to hover the cursor over everything I want to look at is the main thing keeping me away from the mode at the moment. For those of you unfamiliar, the L button used to show what you are looking at, which is now currently, as they mentioned, covered by hovering your mouse over a thing. And Tarn's response is, yeah, we can't support two entire parallel vanilla interfaces, but we're still planning for keyboard support without the need of a mouse. It's also possible that once our Lua conversion can handle the full vanilla interface, people that want to come together and create a different interface, such as the one in 47.05 or otherwise, will have enough API hooks to do so. The Lua conversion is first going to handle procedural objects, but we'd like to expand it to interface objects as well, which should open a lot of avenues. The next question comes in from Eric Blank, and they say, I would assume that it's just not feasible at all unless you limit it to one individual group per sub-region, per species in a region, but if the objective is to simply provide wildlife encounters for the adventurer to hunt, track, and avoid more explicitly, then randomly popping up when you walk around on the local map, then using the army code to create wandering armies of wild animals, or spawning and despawning around the player, is that possible instead? Can armies be created and destroyed arbitrarily enough for that to work? Not necessarily a complex mechanic gameplay-wise, but it could be more complex by conditions like season, time of day, taken into account. And armies also create trails of tracks that can be followed, even in local play. If you hide certain armies from the player until they are close enough, their tracks are discovered. Then that can contribute as an additional hunting mechanic. But you wouldn't get to seek out animal dens this way. They wouldn't have any. And Tarn's response is, I'd rather not use the army code because it's too heavyweight for a simple moving creature. It also wouldn't make very good sense, since you'd find several other creatures of the same type. If you just did the local travel through the typical generation mechanisms, so it wouldn't make any sense. It would be nice to have some lighter weight mid-level structures on the region that handled it all more properly, and this might also give us cool stuff like large migrations. The next question comes into Please Oh Please, and they say, I know this is probably a super boring question, but how does the vision system work for NPCs? Has it changed at all with the introduction of adventure mode? Or will it change in the future? Is it the same thing as the vision cone in the creature raws? I would assume it's the same between Fortress and adventure mode, but if not, what's the difference? Best I know is from the DF hack devs, that being it's apparently its massive array through the creature raws. It looks like it may be accessible, but nobody knows how to interpret any of the data, or how the mechanics work. Is it similar to CDDA at all? And in adventure mode, is there a separate interaction between NPC line of sight with other NPCs, and an NPC line of sight with the player character? And Tarn's response is, I'm not sure what the massive array is. They just cast obstruction-sensitive sight lines within their range, which are cleared with their vision angles in adventure mode. In fort mode, there aren't angles. The NPCs and the NPC player character line of sight stuff is the same, as I recall, though it's possible I cut corners to interpret the speed at some point over the years. I try to not preference the player, aside from the loaded area, whenever I can, so that the sim stays playable. And another question from Please Oh Please, and they say, with the Myth and Magic update adding procedurally generated magic, I'm very interested to see how and if curses are going to get expanded upon. Are there any plans at this point to add deity-specific curses? I think it would be super fun if a deity would bestow a curse based on its spheres, or even based on how a dwarf and human or man-bear thing miffed the god in the first place. Kinda like in real life, mythological curses, as if we have those in real life, come on, like Medusa or Echo. Also, are there any plans to add curses that aren't from gods? Like for instance, a curse on a tomb in World Gen, or a curse from a necromancer into a bloodline. Lastly, are there any plans to add curses to the magic available to dwarves in Fortress mode? Say, putting a curse through some ritual into the tomb of the king or queen, or a macabre/fell mood dwarf with the right religious know-how, putting a curse on their artifact. I think the curse system could add a lot of dimensions to each world, through the gods and demons of the world, and could even bring out some vanilla stories, Lord of the Rings style. So I really would love to hear your thoughts and plans for that in the future. And Tarn's response is, yeah, this all sits right within the realm of things we are interested in. We already have the one non-deity curse. It's all on the very, very large table. So I'm not sure what we'll get to first, though we're rapidly approaching the time of actual decisions here, which is cool. The next question comes in from Jurist McHates Elves, and they say, the wiki mentions traitor dwarves. What are these exactly? Are they an unfinished feature? Or are they so obscure and secretive that no one has encountered them before? And Tarn's response is, I'm assuming the wiki editors here was referring to the artifact heist dwarves. It's just not accidentally revealing artifact presences, which isn't treachery, but dwarves being flipped in the tavern by visitors, generally through threats. They should be revealed by interrogation and in Legends mode. It is an underdeveloped system, but people have seen it. At one point, I remember complaints about it happening too often. And the next question comes in from DPH Kraken, and they say, you've repeatedly brought up mysterious mythological sites as part of Adventure Mode's tutorial arc. Is there any idea of how these dungeons may be populated? I heard that there would be procedural nasties, but what of user-defined creatures? And Tarn's response is, these were fast additions to provide reliable, intact tutorial dungeons. We'll be expanding out the concept, at which point, yeah, you should be able to get them populated. Right now, it just looks for goblin-type creatures so that they don't starve to death in World Gen, running the quest tutorial. Another question from DPH Kraken, and they say, Site code reputation for being unpredictably load-bearing. I wonder, do Mythic dungeons sidestep many issues because they aren't entity-linked? And Tarn's response is, they are entity-linked. They get their equipment from one of the standard civs randomly, and use their entity to keep their populations from killing each other, similar to bandits. I could have used vault-type entities, but that had some unwelcome baggage. As well, it'll probably end up being a third plus option as the mythical site types evolve. And DPH Kraken returns with a very important question. How's the food and drink in your new home? And Tarn's response is, I like it just fine. Went up to Edinburgh and had some whiskey. Had a Sunday roast and had a nice souffle. Went to a chippy, had a seaside donut, and so forth. The Mexican food situation is not ideal, however, which was expected. The next one is a question from Rhino, and there's a second response, so I will read both of them. Rhino asks, can you elaborate on what the specific difference is between the Lua update beta versus the Myth and Magic update? And Tarn quotes Volleylol, so I will read their response first. And they say, the Lua beta initially is just pulling the current proc-gen objects and their generators into the raws, allowing modders to modify how Forgotten Beasts and Divine Materials turn out. The Myth and Magic is a major arc that focuses on proc-gen magic systems and myths, and how these tie into each other and the generated world. Some of it might be implemented using Lua, not in the initial Lua beta though, but some should also be hard-coded. I'm not sure the development page or DF talks are accurate anymore when it comes to how and when these features will arrive, but they should still map out what features are included in Myth and Magic. And Tarn's response is, I think Volleylol's reply covers it. The Lua starts with the existing procedural raw style objects, and expands out from there as a tool to implement much of the Myth and Magic. Myth and Magic starts hard-coded, as we see with the Mythical dungeons, but will become more of a Lua project as Lua gets mainlined and hopefully getting us to a unified state before too long. We're just starting Lua in beta because it's a huge change that needs to be put through its paces, but it won't be in the beta branch forever. Then it'll just be Myth and Magic and more, with Lua as a powerful tool for us and for modders. The next question comes in from Fatace, and they say, will player-made campsites and adventure mode be finished prior to the release of adventure mode, or is that another update afterwards? And Tarn's response to this is, these are coming after the release. We're not sure when. Last we said it was going to be with the first major update to adventure mode, but we're trying to not do major updates anymore, in the time sense. I'm not sure if we'll just try to do the existing interface as quickly as possible or blend it into some other feature, but it's near term after the beta ends. The next question comes in from Vanzetti, and they say, could Dwarf Fortress in the future allow for a 3D world map? Think Underdark, like a giant system of caves and tunnels, and possibly without any surface. And Tarn's response is, yeah, a large part of the former big weight was the map rewrite, which, in part, was made to support this kind of thing. We've figured out enough ways to implement the map changes piecemeal, that we can now just start to slowly make the world more interesting and varied to allow the global map of whichever worlds to be something aside from a 2D rectangle. There are still some huge issues, one of the major ones being how objects that fell into the nothingness are managed when the whole 3D column isn't loaded. Another being army navigation. Another being interface display and interaction. But we're just going to go ahead and see what happens. The next question comes in from a username I like called Flying T-Sets, and they say, how much has Putnam's help sped up the work towards Myth and Magic? Is there still going to be a long wait? And Tarn's response is, yeah, we're really trying to never do long waits again. Putnam's Lua work should be incredibly useful for the Myth and Magic stuff. An awful lot of it will take place in the new scripts, I think. Question comes in from a Spatula66, and they say, currently the mysterious dungeons that are in the beta branch are only inhabited by goblins and a leader. Is that subject to change? Are there going to be multiple different creatures that can appear in the dungeons once the update is finished? And Tarn's response is, I have a long list of things I'd like to do with them, which includes various population changes. But for the purposes of getting the beta complete, goblins are reliable because they were ready to not starve to death. Any other creature placed in there needs to get a special syndrome, etc., to not just die, or else be procedural. So goblins were first. Another question from Spatulas, and they say, at the moment, all the dungeons and primordial remnants in a world are associated with the same single sphere. Is this going to be changed? Some variety here would be nice. And Tarn's response is, each world is different, and we just wanted something to start with. I didn't want to build anything intricate since this is pre-Myth Gen, and the upcoming Myth Gen is how we wanted to do sphere associations. The purposes of these mythical dungeons is to give the player something low-level and reliable to support the chosen tutorial. How that evolves and is incorporated into Myth Gen to still provide reliable tutorialization while becoming vastly more interesting is a challenge, and we'll have to tackle that soon. And a final question from a Spatula, I think, and they say, right now, magical items only allow the user to use interactions. Are there going to be magic items that apply syndromes or passive effects to their user in this update? Since a lot of the magical items in fantasy and other roguelikes rely more on passive effects than activated abilities. Boots of speed, gauntlets of strength, ring of protection, etc. And Tarn's response is, the adventure mode release needs to happen as soon as we can manage it. So I'm probably just going to focus on the tutorial and related issues from now up until the release. But, of course, we'd like to greatly expand what magical items do. I'm just taking a quick routes for this pre-Myth Gen pass on things, to provide any interest at all in the tutorial dungeons. I know they are pretty uninteresting, but it will get better after the beta ends. A question comes in from Randomizer, and I assure you this question isn't that random. And they say, I'm curious, what country did Tarn Adams move to when he got married? And a related question from Jakawa, where they say, I'm curious if Toriwan visited Thrito for Thanksgiving, and also what dishes were served at his Thanksgiving meal. And Tarn's response is, I've moved to the UK. There isn't a Thanksgiving here, but I had a chicken sandwich with cranberries from a coffee shop. Thank you very much for making it to the end. Hopefully I will be more timely come February once I have moved. If you haven't seen it yet, I put up a pretty cool video about an adventure I had in adventure mode, which covers some of the new content that was discussed in this Future of the Fortress. I'm also working on some other projects, so keep your eyes peeled. I'd also like to note that if you want to follow me on somewhere that isn't YouTube or Twitch, I have a Blue Sky, because that's the cool platform that everybody posts on now. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.